Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Sync Your Life podcast. I am so excited today to have my new friends, Matthew and Kimberly Hoffman. They are going to share with us lots of good stuff as it pertains to relationships. And you guys know that one of my biggest areas of focus for this podcast is not just with your hormone health, but also with your relationships and how you can really be the best for both your marriages or your relationships with your children, your siblings, your parents, whatever the case might be. And so these two have an amazing podcast called the Kickass Couples Podcast. And that's something that I started listening to recently. And I've already found so much value in it. It's already bringing up so much great conversation just in my relationship with my husband and things that we're starting to talk about. So I know it's a game changer for a lot of people, and I'm excited to introduce them to you guys. So to get us started today, I thought I would just have them sort of share their story, how they got to where they are now. For those of you who don't see us, but only hear us, they are sitting in their amazing Airstream studio, which I'm so jealous of. I think it's so cool. But Matthew, I'll let you kind of take it away and tell us, a little bit about you guys and what you do.
Sure. I've had the pleasure of being married to my best friend sitting next to me here for 27 years. And, you know, it wasn't always sunshine and roses, right? And I think that we reached a point in our relationship where we were not completely happy, kind of treading water and maintaining. And we knew that something had to change. And we both really started working on our relationship and doubling down and recommitting, and realized in that process that there wasn't a lot of there were a lot of resources spread out all over the place, but there wasn't something that was dedicated and really focused on health of the relationships. And so that kind of got us launched into the Kick-Ass Couples podcast, which started last August. And it's really a support network around a book that I came out with, my first book, Kick-Ass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex. And then we developed a platform called Kick-Ass Couples Nation, which is sole purpose is to help couples, imperfect couples that want to deepen and strengthen their number one relationship. And so that's how we got launched into the world and a little bit of the ministry of helping people with their number one relationship.
Yeah, I think it really started from out of a desire to have a better relationship ourselves, and then to how can we help other people do this? How can we be of service to others in this area? Because this is a need that is never going to go away. It's a need that a lot of people um, are interested in and don't really know exactly how to tap into the resources of how to have a healthy marriage. So.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I always tell people, I remember about 13 years ago when I was exposed to this concept of just personal growth. I remember hearing John Maxwell on a stage talking about how someone had confronted him at one point in his life about his personal growth plan and asking him what his personal growth plan was, and him feeling like, what do you mean? Like, you have to have a plan for growth? And of course you have to have a plan for growth, right? And the same thing I think pertains to marriages and relationships as well, right? It takes intentionality, it takes focus and effort. And I love that you guys are kind of bringing this to the table. So if you guys had to give, one word to kind of encompass what you guys do with your business, what would you say?
Gosh, I would say our business is about prioritization, because I think that people, and that's unique about us, is we help people prioritize their number one relationship. And I think, we spend so much time doing so many things in our lives, and we spend the least amount of time investing, working in, and having that growth plan for our number one human relationship.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in that vortex of work and children, if you have children, extended family, maybe you have church or other things that you're volunteering for, but then you just find yourself spinning in that vortex and you really leave out the number one and the most important relationship that you have, and that's with your spouse or your partner. And so they sort of get the leftovers, which is so unfair and isn't healthy for your relationship in the long term.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about, what are some little things that you guys have found that have worked for you as far as prioritizing your relationship? Like, what are some little things that you've implemented that might help others who are listening?
I think that what one of the things that we have done that's been most important is we spend time throughout the day communicating with each other and making sure that we're really tapping into each other, because that tells me that he's on my team and he's thinking about me, and that I matter to him. And so I feel like those little connections throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, it might be making that time for a little bit of a longer time that we sit down and talk and really say, how's your day? What happened today that was great? What happened today that was really tough? And really listening to each other to try to understand where we are on our own levels, and then diving deeper into, how are we doing? What do you need from me? It's just really about having those constant conversations, I feel, with each other.
Yeah, communication is critical. We have kind of 14 pillars in our platform, and the three foundational ones we call the three C's, and that's commitment, communication, and conflict resolution. So that if those three are strong in a relationship, it's going to bode well for the relationship. And if they're not, then it means that you're going to have a kind of a tough foundation and really struggle to get off center. And I think that, there's Benjamin Franklin has a quote where he says, "Many strokes fell great oaks." And so it's a lot of little things, right? It's not, there's no silver bullet. It's not take one pill, right? For your health, you take one pill and everything's great, right? That's how it works. Well, not really. And it's the same with our relationships. And I think what Kim was alluding to is we have a lot of touch points throughout the day. It could be a text, a phone call, hand on a shoulder. And it's making sure that we're intentional with our communication, and we have those little times. And then we have um, big times that we can have deep conversations uninterrupted. It might be a walk with the dogs at night, might be a ruck that we're exercising together, and it's just the two of us, no phones for an hour and 15 minutes outdoors. And it's being intentional with dates too, and scheduling time. I'm a big believer, Jenny, in scheduling time, because if you treat it like an appointment, everyone says, "Oh, I've got a meeting, I've got a call, I've got to go." Well, okay, so let's block out the time and be intentional so that our spouse is getting specific, dedicated time to develop and form that relationship.
And I would add to that, not just time to communicate, but time to play as well, which I think is really important. We may go for a paddleboard or do something fun together. And I think it's really important that we spend that kind of quality time together as well.
Yeah, my husband and I were just talking last night about our evenings. So in the last couple of years, he started working with me. And so we're working from home together, which means we're in relatively close quarters all day long. We have small children. And so we really have found value in the evenings, like after that time, after the girls go to bed, right, is like our time. And sometimes it really is just sitting next to each other on the couch, right, and just watching a show or sharing a bottle of wine or talking about our day or whatever. And we're finding these sort of pockets in our day where we can sort of connect and have these touch points, which is what you're saying. But I think, at least from what I see, we get a lot of questions in our relationship about, well, don't you ever get sick of each other, right? Like being together all day long, or how do you handle working with the other one and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, no, I genuinely enjoy like being with my spouse. And yes, we definitely need our separate times. We work out separately. I might go for a walk. He might go for a run. We might schedule time with friends, separately. But we thoroughly enjoy being together because we're able to have those touch points, and we're able to say, this matters to us to keep this connection. So what would you say? I know obviously we're sort of kind of freshly coming out of the pandemic, right? This sort of era where people were stuck at home, lives changing a little bit from a work perspective, right? What types of issues are you seeing, whether it's from that or just in general, that couples deal with? Like what problem or problems do you think most couples deal with most frequently?
That's a good question. I think that we touched on it already, but communication, and a lot of people we interview in our podcast, I think it's always an Achilles heel, is they say it could be better. And I think just because, time together doesn't mean communication, right? If someone says, "Oh, we've been married for 50 years, you must have an incredible relationship." No, time is not an indicator of quality. And
Mhm.
just because, proximity isn't either. It's just because you're next to each other doesn't mean there's good things going on. So I think making sure you alluded to it, Jenny. I think there's a lot of things you do together, but there needs to be some things you do separately as well. It's kind of like your individual health is more important for you to be effective in a relationship than the relationship health. So that's why you put your oxygen mask on first. So I want to make sure that Kim is feeling good mentally, physically, spiritually about herself and about our relationship and about the other relationships. Because if she's not, then she can't show up for me and be everything I need her to be in my relationship. So, and I think it's important, and that doesn't always involve me. It's not everything together all the time. Whether it's a girls' trip or a girls' night out, she's involved in a prayer group, things away from kids. She may come to me and say, you know what, I just need to get away for a little while and not be a mom and not be a wife. And I go, okay.
I
And
need to not hear the word mom for
hey
just
mom,
a few
hey mom,
hours.
mom, hey mom.
Mom.
So, I think it's really understanding. And if you're in tune with and you're resonating with your spouse, then you can look at them and go, all right, a little testy, things are tough. And it's not doing what you think they need. I'm not a mind reader, right? I'm not a swami. I can't intuit what she's thinking and feeling, but I can say, how are you feeling? What do you need? Would you like this? Or I'm really stressed. Okay, what would be most relaxing for you right now? Oh, let's just go have a glass of wine on the porch and listen to some music. Great, right? So if she tells me this is what I need, then I can help support it. But I'm not going to guess and take a stab in the dark and just, throw a diagnosis on it and treat it and try to solve it when I don't really understand what it is she needs in that moment.
I think it's really important to be able to voice what you need from your spouse
Mm-hmm.
and sort of how you need it. It's sort of like a love language. You've heard about the 5 love
Mm-hmm.
languages. So I think it's really important that we share what those important things are to us, how we like to be loved, how we may want to be appreciated, whatever it might be. If your spouse doesn't know it, it's not fair to assume that they should know it, or it just, you put them in a really tough place if they don't know exactly what you value and what's important to you. So I think it's really important to speak those things.
Absolutely. We did a study with our Bible group really early on in our marriage where we read the 5 love languages, and it's been such a game changer for our relationship. We refer to it so often. And ironically, I have a good friend of mine who just got engaged last week, and it was the first thing I put in my Amazon cart was to get her she and her spouse, or her future spouse, copies of the book. Because when Chris and I learned what each other's love languages are, it really helped me identify not just, I already knew his personality. I already knew that we sort of balanced each other out in some ways, but when you can really feel, like when you can really understand how another person receives love, and not be so self-centered on the way that you need all the time, right? Like, how can I serve you? And it's even been helpful for us in our children's lives, understanding what their love languages are. Both my husband and my oldest daughter are physical touch love language people. And so I am very much, all of my friends would tell you, I'm not a hugger. Like I'm like one of those like apprehensive huggers when I meet people. And so it's taken a lot of intentionality on my part to say, okay, my 5-year-old needs me to sit and hold her while she watches this cartoon, right? Like, she doesn't want me to just be doing the dishes. She wants me to sit with her and hold her and hold her hand. Same thing with my spouse, right? Like setting aside time for physical touch and making that an intentional effort. So if anyone listening has not read that book with your spouse, I highly recommend it. I can link it up in the show notes. But one thing that I wanted to just sort of ask you guys about, because you see, obviously you guys are interviewing a lot of happy couples on your podcast, and you're helping people who are maybe struggling as well. I want to hear from you. This is something that I see as a health and wellness coach. I've been health and wellness coaching women in particular for the last 13 years. And it is so prevalent that women will start their health and wellness journey and be met with this sort of lack of support on behalf of their spouse. And Chris and I just happened to be talking about this last night. We were talking about, what makes us happy, like what has led to us being happily married for 16 years. And the one thing that we kept coming back to was that we're always supportive of the other person. Like, if there's something that the other person wants to do, or something I think about different phases in our relationship where like he's wanted to pursue things and I've had to kind of give some things up, or I've wanted to pursue things and he's had to give some things up. And that sort of give and take that has to happen sometimes in a relationship, right? And so I'm just curious when it comes to, I mean, obviously when it comes to health and wellness, I know a lot of that falls back on insecurity, right? It can be an insecurity in the other person feeling like, well, this person, here's my spouse, like they're going out and they're trying to maybe get a better body, right? Like, why are they trying to get a better body? Or they feel a little excluded because it's not maybe a priority for them at that time. And so this is something that I see so frequently in what I do. And I'm just curious what you would say to that woman that might be listening who is really wanting to prioritize her health, but she's maybe met with sarcastic comments from her spouse or a lack of support. How would you, again, I have a feeling you're going to talk about communication, but I want to hear from you what you would say to that person listening.
I think that it really comes down to, if I'm committed to you in this relationship, then I am going to do whatever it takes to um, have peace within that relationship, right? So if health and wellness is a priority for your spouse, which I think that it's a wonderful thing that you would want to do that for yourself. I think it's so important that we take care of ourselves first, because if we're not healthy and we're not in a great headspace, then what are we going to be for someone else? So first of all, I think it's great that any woman would want to prioritize that. And if we're committed in our relationship, then one would hope that the male component would say, "Hey, I support you in that, and I'm going to do whatever it takes if you need extra time in the day or if I have to take care of the kids." And if the spouse isn't, then I think it's really important that they sit down and have a real conversation surrounding that, and that the wife explains, "This is why it's important to me. It makes me a better mom. It makes me a better wife." So I really think that you have to share and be open with why it is so important. And if that other person is truly committed, then they're going to really try to understand and really accept where you are. So that's what I would. Do you want to add to that, Matthew? I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that it's you have to be willing to allow your spouse to travel the way they need to travel. And I think men have a bad rap, and I'll never, I try not to say all men, right? But men love to jump in and provide solutions. And I think most of the time, and my counsel and advice is, your wife doesn't need you to solve anything. They just want you to listen and have understanding. And I think Kim and I, fitness and wellness, for that example you gave, is important to both of us, but we both pursue it in very different ways. And we do it individually more than we do it together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've had to let go of a lot of outcomes in relationships. I'm not in charge of her outcome, right? I can't make her happy. I can't make her content. All I can do is pour in and ask and keep taking tabs on, am I giving her what she needs when she needs it? And I think, before marriage, it's I and it's you. But when you're married, it's us. So when you can make decisions that, you can ask the question, is this the best decision for the relationship? And if you can say yes, it's probably a good thing. If this is the best decision for you, but it's not necessarily good for the relationship, then that's where sacrifice comes in. And so being willing, if I've got to make a sacrifice of time, of something I want to do, because it's going to give her the freedom to do something that's best for her and best for the relationship, I got to be willing to do that. Marriage is
Mm-hmm.
about compromise and sacrifice. It's not about being a doormat. It doesn't mean that one spouse's needs are met and the others are not. But it also means that there's seasonality and cyclicality, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're each going to have a season that we're in and out of the spotlight, where somebody's needs are maybe more important, or not necessarily more important, but front and center in that moment. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a dance. And when you're really committed and searching and looking, that's a beautiful dance, because you're not questioning if the commitment's there, right? That cornerstone of the relationship. Then you're not saying, are they going to be there for me when I need them? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been there for them. Are they going to be there for me? That's a commitment issue. It has nothing to do with anything else. So if the commitment's solid, then you can both go forward in comfort, knowing, man, my spouse, she's got my back. When I need her, she's going to show up and be there, and it's not quid pro quo because we're delivering in that moment.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think the one thing that I find myself saying so frequently, I run a team of health coaches. And so a lot of times women will come into my network marketing business and they're also starting a health and wellness journey, or they're sort of maybe elevating their health and wellness journey. And that lack of support that they're receiving is almost always, at least when I have the conversation with them, seems to be tied back to missing communication, right? Like they come into this community of positive people who like to work out and whatever. And maybe the spouse is feeling a little bit excluded, or they're feeling a little bit like they don't know what that spouse is really going through, or what, and so sometimes I have to say to the women who join my team, and when this happens, I sometimes have to say, like, well, are you telling him? Are you telling him about that event we had Saturday? Are you telling him how it made you feel? Are you telling him, how the endorphins that you felt afterwards? Are you inviting him to come along? Are you telling, what stories are you telling him? And this also brings up another thought that I want to ask about, and it ties in great to the question, which is, a few years ago, I heard this. I don't know if it was a TED talk or what it was, but it was Brene Brown talking about, of course, she talks dominantly about shame. And she was talking about the story of she and her husband who were out. I think it was like a little family vacation or family getaway. And the two of them went swimming every single morning together. And I don't remember the details of the story, but I can give you the overview, which is that she and her husband were out swimming, and she sensed this tension from him, right? Like the whole time they were swimming, she sensed this tension. And so in her mind, the whole time they're swimming laps in this lake or whatever they're doing, she's thinking like, he doesn't think I'm sexy anymore. Like he doesn't think I'm attractive. Like he hasn't touched me. He hasn't, like, she's got all these different things that she's telling herself in her head. And meanwhile, he's thinking, I don't want to go swimming here. I had this horrible dream, something about a dream where he dreamed his child was drowning, and he was like deathly afraid of swimming in the lake. But he was doing it because she wanted him to do it. Right. And they were doing it together. And so here he's got this whole, train of thought happening during the swim. And she's got this whole train of thought happening during the swim. And her story was all about how it comes back to the stories we tell ourselves. And what is the story that you're telling yourself? And then are you sharing that with your spouse? Like, are you being openly communicative about what that is? And so she, of course, brings the story full circle to them standing on the side of the dock or whatever, and kind of getting it all out, right? Like kind of frustratingly saying like, well, this is the way I feel. And him being, this is the way I feel. And then being like, well, why haven't we communicated that before this moment? And so all of that to say, to give that story, I've heard, and I listened to a few of your podcasts where I heard you guys talking about this in particular, that relationships don't always fail over time because of something dramatic like cheating or abuse or anything like that. A lot of times it comes down to something else. So can you talk to us about what that is and what people can sort of be looking for and adjusting in their own relationships?
I think it's definitely a slow fade. And that's the scary part, is because it's silent. You don't really realize that it's happening. And I think that couples get into a rut of not paying attention to those 3 C's that we talked about, right? They're really not as committed. They are not communicating well. They don't know how to resolve conflict very well. And so you get caught up, and we talked about that vortex of life. And then that slow fade just really starts to happen because you're not making connections throughout the day. You're not resolving things when they come up immediately. And you're just sort of living in this, parallel life together, but you're really not connecting. And so I think that's what the scary part is that over time, all of a sudden you've just really grown apart instead of together. And so I think we have to be very careful of that. We got ourselves caught in that very rut after being married for probably 18, 19 years. Here we are, we're just kind of, existing. That's the way I would like to call it. And we're not really thriving. We're not really tending to our marriage and doing the things that we need to do to keep it healthy and thriving and in a really good place.
Yeah, there's Dr. John Gottman uses a term called sliding door moments. And the reason he calls them that is because, if you think of a sliding door like at a store, right? Electric, it opens and closes. And you can either choose to walk in or not, right? So you have to have that timing down. And throughout our day with our spouse and our relationship, there are what we call bids. There are bids that they put out, okay, where you're being invited to engage. She might I might be with her in the kitchen and then I hear, oh, I can't believe it. That's a bid. She's expressing frustration with something. And I can either ignore it and go, there she goes again. She's blowing off steam, right? Or I can go, hey, honey, that was a really big sigh. What brought that on? Well, let me tell you, right? And now we're connecting so that I can choose to walk into the moment and engage with her and find out and communicate and have a touch point, or I can ignore it and move along. And we have those moments countless times throughout the day. So I think what happens, couples are choosing not to enter into those moments and engage. And we call that leaning in. Leaning into the relationship is like, oh, I'm going to get in here and get close and make the most of this. It's an active decision, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Then leaning away is, you know what? I'm not happy with her. I don't like what she said to me. She made me feel that way. So I'm going to give her the cold shoulder. I'm going to disengage. I'm choosing not to get close. Or they did something that really got me angry, man. And next time they try to do something, I'm ready for battle. So you're
Hmm.
leaning against. So as Kim said, it's a slow fade because it's repeatedly over time choosing not to lean in, engage, and go into that sliding door when the opportunity arises.
Yeah. And then you
And
become bitter and resentful. And so all these really ugly things start to come into play after a little while. And it makes for a very um, rocky relationship.
I love that sliding door analogy. That's a good visual of, it makes me think like what bids am I receiving throughout the day that I'm missing that I can now listen for. So that's a huge thing. I think, again, kind of coming back to that idea of the stories that we tell ourselves, by not entering that door, by not taking that bid, how often throughout the day are we just telling ourselves something, right? That was part of your story. You said maybe you think to yourself, oh, she's just blowing off steam again, right? Like that's a story that you're putting in your head as opposed to engaging with the other person, which is so, so crucial.
Right. You have that. As Brene was telling you that story, she had an opportunity to be vulnerable and say in that moment, hey, this is what I'm feeling right now. I don't know why I'm feeling this, but I need to share with you what's on my heart and what's on my mind. And
Hmm.
had they had that conversation, then they wouldn't be having these two separate stories and then, coming back together and her being sort of blowing off the steam of, oh my gosh, next thing you know, there's a little conflict over what happened rather than just having a conversation about it and being really
Right.
open. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to say, hey, I don't feel like you're desiring me right now. I don't think that you think that I look good or I look sexy in this swimsuit. It's hard to say that to your spouse.
Right.
But I think when we can, it just brings us closer together rather
Right.
than rip us
and I
apart.
think that story illustrates the point. There's always two different
Yeah.
stories going on, and the reality is they're both real.
Yeah.
It's not one's true and one's false. It's the viewpoint, and they're each. And I do an exercise in a training that we put together, and it's a silly thing, but it's about the way if you take your finger, Jenny, and you put it up at the ceiling and you turn it clockwise. Kim and I are sitting next to each other. I'll say, Kim, which way is my finger turning? Clockwise, clockwise. If she's opposite me and I point to her and I turn my finger clockwise, she's going to go, no, it's not. It's counterclockwise. And I'm going to go, oh, no, it's clockwise. So we're both right. But
Hmm.
unless you're next to each other, in each other's shoes, experiencing the same thing, you're going to always have a different viewpoint. So
Hmm.
it's, marriage, relationships is all about getting next to each other and sharing the same viewpoint. If I can value her opinions as much as I value my own, if there's real to me, and she does the same for me, that's empathy, right? That's
Hmm.
empathic. And then I'm understanding, wow, I can see how she feels that way or why she
Right.
thinks this
And it's
or
not about agreeing. It's not
yeah.
about agreeing with me because maybe he doesn't agree at all, but he's trying to understand
Understand.
where I am.
Hmm. He's sitting with you, right? He's sitting with you through it and listening. Yeah.
Listening, he's trying to understand.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think that a lot of my listeners are moms of littles and moms of children. Maybe they're, maybe they're also juggling a career, or maybe they're staying home. And I know for me, in the thick of it, right, with a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, where I feel like it's funny because my parents will ask sometimes about, like, do you want us to help with the kids so you guys can have a date night or whatever? And the funny thing is that my husband and I will just be like, of course, yes. But also, like, we feel like we don't even see each other in our own house most of the time because we're in a situation where my 5-year-old has preschool drop off, preschool pickup. The 1-year-old has a different nap schedule, right? And so we're constantly juggling and passing one kid off to the other, and finding time to work and all that kind of stuff. So we've, in the last year since my youngest was born, we've really had to, we text throughout the day. We'll send each other like funny little gifts, which is, sometimes that's life, honestly. Like, sometimes it's like sanity, right, in the midst of small children. But I'm curious, for women who are listening to this and who are kind of in the thick of it with small children, where they feel like so much of their sleep is controlled by their child, so much of their schedule is controlled by their child. Um, or children, how can women, especially who are in relationships and in marriages, make that priority to focus on their spouse at times, and to make that time commitment to the relationship outside of kids?
Well, I think Matthew kind of alluded to it earlier, and that is sometimes you have to schedule it, especially when you have young children. So whether it's scheduling time to be together in the evening, whether it's scheduling a date night, I think it's really important. I get it. We were there. It's really hard to be in that phase of where you have young kids and where you're working full time. There's only so much time in the day.
Mhm.
And I think that young couples that are having healthy relationships and doing really well do whatever they can to prioritize their relationship, to try to make it first.
Mhm.
And again, it might be just little snippets, like you said, it could be texting, but I think carving out those times together, and it can be just flirting with each other via texting as
Mhm.
well. But I think you have to continue to pursue each other. That would be my biggest advice, is whatever it takes, continue to pursue each other, because that's what gets lost. And that's where marriages start to break down a little bit. And, you're tired. I get it. But I
Yeah.
think you have to really focus and be aware of spending time together.
Yeah, there's a chapter in my book, Kickass Husband, called Eternal Woo. And Kim just beautifully described that. And it means that, okay, we're married now and we did a lot of courting. I'm a huge romantic and I courted my wife and try to do a lot of things to surprise her and be romantic. Just because you're married, that can't stop, right? You
Mhm.
got to keep getting creative about the time you spend together, doing new things, doing something. And sometimes things have flopped and you're like, okay, well, that wasn't really what we thought it would be. But what's a nice gift, and I know, for women have it so much harder than men because the societal expectations on women in marriage. I'm a mom, I'm a career, I'm supposed to take care of the home environment, and that's not always the case. And
Yeah. And be a
husbands,
sex goddess.
yeah, 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 and be the sexy
Right.
woman whenever, I mean, so it's hard. I can't. Women have it so much harder than men. But as a man in a relationship, uh, for me to plan something for us together and to think of as many of the details as I can, doesn't have to be this over the top crazy getaway weekend. We've done those, right? When we've been able to, and I've surprised her with those too. But just a date night at a unique or different place that we can have that communication, have that time. We're both dressed up, right? We're both preparing. It's something in advance. I invite her to it, right? So I think women and men giving that to each other um, is a great gift because they're it's those little slices of time away, no kids, no responsibilities, and you got to be careful that when you're on that date, it's not, oh my gosh, what did our Johnny did today, and it's that date can't be about those kids. It's got to be about you and reconnecting and having
Mhm.
that discipline to have that time together, and that's really nourishing when you can.
And I think it's important that you take turns doing that. I mean, you have definitely taken the ball with that and gone with it many a time, but I think you have to both share in that.
Mhm.
And then that way, the other spouse has something to look forward to. Oh, wow, it's date night. I wonder what the other person planned.
Mhm.
So there's something exciting to look forward to. But I think we have to be aware and be cognizant and be intentional about really taking time together.
Yeah.
Doesn't, I mean, even with that, all that crazy stuff going on around us, we have to carve out that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've noticed too, especially now that my oldest is 5.5, right? Like she picks up on the vibe and the tone of our marriage. Like she picks up on, like we were just talking about this last night. We used to have a golden retriever and before kids, we were married for 10 years before kids, and we had a golden retriever. And every time Chris would come home from school and he would hug and kiss me, the dog would come up and try to interrupt, right? Like the dog would be like so excited that its tail would wag and it would like try to jump between us. And it's so funny because now that happens and it's our kids instead. So our kids come running up to us. Like if they see us hugging in the kitchen or kissing in the kitchen, they come running up and want to tackle us like, no, I want daddy to hug me. I want you to, they want in on it. And so it's so interesting how like even just a night out can change the tone for your family too, right? Like coming back from a night out on Friday night and Saturday morning is so much more calm. Mom and dad are maybe feeling a little bit more sane and the kids feel that. They feel like, they feel more loved or they feel more appreciated because all of a sudden mom and dad have had their own time. And so now they're able to give more into the children. And that's something that I talk about a lot on the podcast, is just this concept of you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And that especially pertains to your health. Like if you are feeling off, if your hormones are out of balance, if you're feeling like you are just very low energy, of course that's going to cater, it's going to filter into your relationships. It's going to filter into your life. But the same thing goes for your relationship as well, right? Like if it's feeling off or you're not making it a priority, then that's going to cascade into your family as well. So I want to ask specifically about sex. This is a women's hormone podcast. So I want to ask about it. You guys are welcome to answer, or we can keep going, whichever you prefer. But I want to talk about how you can make sex a priority and, maybe some tangible tips or whatever you guys want to do when it comes to this topic. Like, I really want to help people achieve this status of like feeling like they're just, I don't know, vibing on a high level with their spouse. And to me, I know that sometimes comes back to sex life. Are we connecting physically enough, frequently enough? Is it really, I see it so much in just our overall energy together. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that and what you would say.
Go ahead.
So it's interesting because I'm going to back up to answer your question, and I definitely want to hear Kim's input on this too. But I'm going to back up because intimacy. I've been focusing a lot on talking about intimacy, and I'm a regular contributor on a primarily women's health and wellness show in Tampa on NBC affiliate, and we talk about what's the formula for intimacy, and sex is certainly, men think, if you ask 9 times out of 10, you ask a man, how do you get intimate? Sex, right? And it is correct, and that does happen, but there's other ways to experience intimacy. So if you want to have a red hot sex life, that's the result. You can't, you got to start like, so, you can have spiritual intimacy. You can have emotional intimacy. You can have intellectual intimacy. You can have physical intimacy that does not involve sex. It's touch and proximity and closeness. And if you focus on all those ways of creating intimacy with your partner, when you get to the sex, that's when it's fulfilling and interesting, and you can't wait to have more because and women, I know that I've learned, I study women, and I've learned that to get intimate with a woman, you've got to hit the emotional first. It's not, you got to, if you want to have that great physical relationship, you got to be hitting on all the other areas first. And
Mm-hmm.
so as a guy, I know, and it's true for me too. There's so many ways to connect, and when we invest in connecting all those other ways first, when we arrive to the sexual connection, it's deeper and it's more meaningful.
I would agree. I am middle-aged. I'm in full-on menopause, and I'm in a tough place right now, not taking anything for it. And so it's been a real challenge for me. But I will say this, when he is pursuing intimacy on an emotional level with me. Maybe he's just, massaging my back, or he is pursuing me in a very intimate way, not asking for sex. Those desires and that, um I mean, I feel like I'm so filled up in that way that it makes me want him in a sexual way.
Hmm.
So I think that even though I'm in the middle of all that, when, most women are like, oh no, I'm all dried up, I can't go there. Um, I don't feel that way at all, because he's pursuing me in a very different, intimate way, which leads to the sexual part of it. And
Hmm.
that part is still very fulfilling. So does that make sense? It's,
Yeah. No, I love that answer. And I was thinking of this podcast that I listened to recently. I'll have to see if I can find it and link it up. And it was from a quote unquote sex expert. And she was talking about exactly what Matthew was just saying, which is that women need this sort of emotional connection in order to get the most pleasurable sex, honestly, like in order to get fully immersed in the experience, and in order to have sort of, a climax that there is just going to blow their mind. Like it has to get to a point where they're feeling so emotionally connected with their significant other that they can go there, right, on a physical level. And so I think it's so true. And a lot of times, hearing from you or hearing from that podcast or hearing things like that makes me put words to sort of what I've already experienced, right? Like for myself, as someone who, as early as my 20s, started experiencing low hormone energy. Like I had a lot of issues coming off of birth control and migraine headaches and sort of this low libido situation due to hormones. Getting that corrected, of course, like treating the root cause was so key, but also just realizing that having that emotional connection through conversation, through, like you said, a back rub or hand holding or whatever the case is, where you feel like you're connected on a different level, is so much different than just this sort of request for sex or this, we should have sex now because we haven't, or whatever the case is. Right. So I love that you just went there with intimacy. And I think obviously through this entire episode, we've talked about different ways to create that intimacy, whether it's through connecting on a communication level, going out for date nights, scheduling time with your spouse, and then making those small gestures. I want to know, I know you guys talk about this concept of relationship nirvana. I'd love for you to sort of define for me what relationship nirvana is and give us some advice as far as like, how could a couple reach that status?
So it's interesting because if you would have asked me this years ago, I'd have given you a different response. And what I'll tell you, and the reason we're talking about it, is because it leads right into the platform of what we do and what we want to help couples with, just like you want to help women and help couples, is relationship nirvana is not the top of a mountain that we're climbing. And man, we've surmounted it, right? We're there, we're done. Relationship nirvana is intentionally setting up the process that you are working on investing in your relationship and relating to your spouse. And that's multifaceted, right? Kim and I Esther Perel and David White had a webinar yesterday, and it came to me through my sister because she loves David White and I like Esther Perel. And she's like, hey, you should check this out. So that was an enrichment, right? And it was intellectual. And we sat there and listened to them. He's a poet and she's a psychologist, psychotherapist. And so you had both those elements. We connected emotionally. We took notes. We talked about it. That was an enrichment. So that's one way. That's one arrow in the quiver for us in our relationship, for connection and feeding our relationship. Another one, as Kim said, is playing together, whether it's rucking or we're both learning how to play pickleball right now, right? And so we're doing something fun. We're on equal footing about it, and that's another thing. So we are piecing together an intentional plan of working on our relationship. Having the plan is nirvana. Having the plan with all the social, the emotional, the spiritual, the physical, the sexual elements as part of it are all firing different synapses that make the relationship rewarding, fulfilling, challenging, not perfect.
Yeah, there's no such thing.
No such thing as perfection, but we're in nirvana when we're both equally committed to investing and working in the relationship in all those different ways.
And I would just add to that, uh, knowing how to resolve conflict well. Because when you can do that in your relationship, you look at it as an opportunity for growth rather than an opportunity for us just to go head to head and go at it. And I think once we've learned how to really resolve conflict in a good way, then there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. A couple that we interviewed, they said conflict is a call to intimacy.
Mhm.
It's an opportunity to be more intimate. It's not about,
Right.
it's not an
It's not a
opportunity
bad
for,
thing.
it's not a bid for war. It's saying, hey, here's an issue. We get to deal with this now. And if you look
Mhm.
at conflict as an opportunity, an invitation to connection, as opposed to an invitation to war, as you can imagine, the outcome will be radically different.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's like, I think about that in terms of, you know, as an entrepreneur, what I'm always experiencing is this concept of really teaching myself that there's really no such thing as failure. It's just I'm going to learn from different experiences. I'm going to make progress regardless. And these are all teaching opportunities, right? They're all moments that I can learn from. And I love that. I just wrote that down. Conflict is a call to intimacy. So I've enjoyed our time today, and I wish we had more time, but I do want to ask you just sort of one final question before we wrap up, which is, what would you say is one thing, whether it's a habit or whatever, that you guys have incorporated into your relationship that you've seen has had a direct impact on your marriage? What would that be?
For me, it's going to be enrichment. I think that really trying to do things to enrich our marriage. It might be taking a course like we did just the other day. We listened to this talk. And so I think constantly pursuing ways to make our relationship better, I would say, has been a big uh, takeaway for me, a big plus for me.
Yeah. I mean, I would say shared experiences. I think it's part of maturing and getting older. You think about jewelry or the thing or, buying a gift, and that's not our love language, anyways, but shared experiences first of all, they're fun for me and they're fun for her and they're fun for us. But we remember fondly the times that we've had great experiences together because it creates something that we experience together, which we each do differently, but we've gone through it. So it's giving us something to relate to together. And it's usually fond and fun, whether it's a vacation, it could be going to a theatrical performance, it could be watching our kid or neighbor do something that was just, touched our funny bone. But those shared experiences are the richness in our relationship. And so pursuing and going after those and working to create them, set the stage so they can occur and unfold has been incredibly rewarding for me and I think for us as well.
I love both of those answers. I think enrichment speaks to me. Both of what you have said has spoken to me, but I think from an enrichment perspective, that's been so true for us as well, to really like plug into something intellectual that helps us process something differently, whether it's related to relationships or related to business. To be quite honest, we've done a lot of like business trainings together, and we come out of those experiences really just connecting on a different level. Has nothing to do with anything but our brain waves, right? Like it's gotten me thinking, it's gotten him thinking, and we're able to sort of connect in that way. So I love that. But I also love what you just said about shared experiences, because I know for us, especially coming out of 2020 and the pandemic and everything that's been happening and having small children and feeling a little bit trapped at home for the last few years, we have really had to focus now on what are some things that we can do, right? YOLO, right? You only live once. Like, what are some things that we can do so that we don't look back when we're, 70 or 80 years old and say, oh, I wish we had done this, or I wish we would have had more experiences, right? And so anywhere from like about a month ago, we took our girls to a hotel that was approximately 4 miles down the road. And we were just like, you know what? They don't know if they're in Florida or if they're here. They know nothing else aside from that this hotel has a pool, right? And so we decided we're gonna go for 2 nights. And we had a ball. We had nowhere to be. It was just like, let's just go somewhere different, like have a different experience, eat in the hotel lobby, which was like a foreign experience for people coming out of the pandemic to actually eat somewhere in public, right? Like having these sort of new things for the girls. When we came out of that thinking this was so much fun, and we wound up taking the girls to Orlando for spring break, and that was amazing, right? But we look back and we're like, the 2 nights here in Indianapolis, like 5 miles down the road, was just as memorable. And so going out of our way to say, like, what are some things that we can do, not just for our family and shared experiences for our family, but also for us, I think is a huge takeaway. So, well, I just want to thank you guys so much. I'm so grateful that we've connected, and I'm so glad that you guys have taken time out of your day to talk with me and my listeners. I'd love for you to kind of point people in your direction. So how can people find your podcast? How can they find what you're doing? Give us all the details.
Sure. So you can find our podcast, the Kickass Couples Podcast. We're on Spotify, we're on iTunes, we're on YouTube, we're on most podcast platforms, I think over 17. And if you want to learn more about our community, Kickass Couples Nation, you can go to MatthewPHoffman.com, and you can listen to the podcast there. You can find out more about Kickass Couples Nation. We have webinars we do twice a month. We have a Facebook private group. We have all kinds of resources that you can check out and learn if you want to invest in and strengthen that relationship.
Yeah, we even have therapists available for our listeners. So good stuff.
I loved that when he was giving me a little rundown of what you guys do. I think it's amazing. So for those of you listening, check them out, MatthewPHoffman.com or the Kickass Couples Podcast, anywhere you get podcasts. Again, thank you guys so much for your time today. I'll link everything up in the show notes so that everybody has quick access to everything. But thanks again for being here, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Jenny,
Pleasure.
for having us.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.